Recently, the USS Khan, a U.S. Navy destroyer, DDG-64, intercepted and neutralized 19 targets, including cruise missiles and unmanned drones, in the Red Sea. The targets were launched from Yemen by Houthi rebel forces, reportedly having connections to Iran. This operation lasted approximately 9 hours and was directed towards Israel. Some targets were found to be at altitudes that could potentially endanger civilian air traffic. The USS Khan, an ALB-class destroyer, used SM-2 Standard missiles to intercept the incoming threats. These missiles are used by the U.S. Navy for interception of a range of threats. The destroyer successfully intercepted 3 incoming missiles and several unmanned aerial vehicles launched by Houthi forces. The USS Khan had entered the Red Sea via the Suez Canal on October 18 as part of its mission to promote maritime security in the Middle East. This incident coincided with increased tensions in the region due to conflict between Hamas and Israel. Concurrently, U.S. bases in Syria and Iraq were targeted via unmanned aerial vehicles. Allies reported minor injuries from these attacks. Following the onset of the Hamas-Israel conflict on October 10, the U.S. deployed a naval task force, headed by the aircraft carrier USS Zeron, to the eastern Mediterranean. The U.S. provided additional ammunition and equipment to its ally, Israel, during this period. The U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin directed the deployment of the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit in the region as a display of the U.S.'s commitment to Israel's security. President Joe Biden announced that he would request additional military aid for Israel and Ukraine from the U.S. Congress. The proposed financial support was presented as beneficial to U.S. national security interests, as it would contribute to the security of allies like Israel and Ukraine. In his announcement, President Biden emphasized the significance of military support to partners like Israel and Ukraine. The proposed emergency budget request is anticipated to be around $105 billion, which includes $60 billion for Ukraine and an additional $14 billion for Israel. Daniel Hagar, the Israeli military spokesperson, confirms the military's readiness for the next phase of the conflict and awaits political directives. This comes as Israel applies lessons learned from U.S. experiences in the Middle East. Hagar stresses the unique nature of Israel's conflict, which takes place within its own borders, unlike the U.S.'s remote Middle Eastern involvements. He also highlights the Israeli military's preparedness for future combat scenarios. Egypt's role in facilitating the release of those captured by Hamas militants is acknowledged by Hagar as a high-priority issue for Israel. Israel's president has expressed a preference to avoid war with Hezbollah in the north, instead focusing on the Hamas conflict in Gaza. This was conveyed during a meeting with visiting French President Emmanuel Macron. Macron, expressing support for Israel, underscored the importance of securing hostage releases in Gaza, while also cautioning about possible regional conflict escalation. Macron's team stated their visit aimed to propose practical solutions to prevent an escalation of conflict, ensure Israel's security, and advocate for a two-state solution. After his Israel visit, Macron intends to meet Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah, marking the first visit by any Western leader to the Palestinian Authority's base amidst the ongoing crisis. Previously, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant estimated a potential 3-month duration for the ongoing campaign. The Israeli Defense Ministry's spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, did not comment specifically on why a ground offensive has been delayed. Instead, he reiterated Israel's determination to defeat Hamas and secure their people's return home through targeted airstrikes while minimizing risk to the military. He conceded that airstrikes alone may not fully eliminate Hamas, but asserted that the conflict would end if Hamas leaves their hiding places, releases captives, and surrenders unconditionally. The statement purports that if certain conditions are not met, Israel may potentially initiate a campaign into Gaza. This was highlighted by Defense Minister Yoav Gallant at the Israeli Air Force headquarters, where he indicated this operation should ideally be the last one in Gaza, with a view to eliminate Hamas. Furthermore, Bloomberg has reported that the U.S. along with several European allies have advocated for Israel to delay a ground offensive into Gaza, to facilitate negotiations for the release of hostages held by Hamas. The probability of sustained conflict between Israel and Hamas is currently high, with analysts predicting that Israel, supported by the West, may escalate its attack on Gaza. Speculations about a ground offensive against Gaza are mounting. In contrast, the situation in the West Bank is also growing increasingly intricate and grave. A potential large-scale conflict in northern Israel between the Israel Defense Forces and the Hezbollah movement has raised concerns, especially since this group is a formidable military entity in the region. Despite this, the general consensus among observers is that a widespread outbreak of hostilities does not align with the preferences of the United States and Europe, resulting in mounting pressure on Israel from the West. The current immediate scenario is expected to unfold primarily in the Palestinian territories, including Gaza and the West Bank. While a rapid cessation of hostilities is a possibility given the international intervention, it might be challenging to achieve. The United States and Europe, two of the most influential nations on Israel, are not insisting on a ceasefire, but are advocating for minimal casualties. In other news, Russia has recently launched airstrikes on militant centers in Syria, leading to the destruction of a training camp and an ammunition depot of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group. Vadim Kunit, the deputy director of the Russian Center for Reconciliation of the Opposing Sides in Syria, communicated that the objective of the attack was to curb any provocative actions by terrorists. Furthermore, the U.S. Defense Ministry reassured that the recent drone attack on a military academy in Homs, which resulted in numerous casualties, did not impact the U.S. military or the international anti-ISIS coalition. Simultaneously, the U.S. military announced the interception of 2 drones aimed at these positions and their allies in Syria. It was also mentioned that no harm was inflicted upon the U.S. military or the international coalition against ISIS in Syria during a recent attack. In Iraq, the Islamic Resistance Movement claimed responsibility for a drone attack against the U.S. military in Al-Tanf, Syria. This group also claimed to have targeted U.S. forces in Iraq a week prior. Presently, the U.S. has approximately 900 troops in Syria and 2,500 troops in Iraq, continuing their efforts against ISIS.